was contract this and contract that and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, what the heck has happened to this industry? Like, we used to be able to just do stuff and we could get things done, and all of a sudden it became this big legal battle. And in the end, that was the project that made me leave the industry. Welcome back to the Sideshed podcast. Before we jump into this episode, I want to share a concerning statistic and an observation that was made apparent to us over the last 18 months or so over at Tradie Web Guys, which is the digital agency that we run that specializes in trade businesses. 8 out of 10 businesses that came to us, actually 85% of the businesses that came to us, with no exaggeration, they did not have the right foundations laid when they came to us looking for marketing related services. So what does that actually mean? Well, essentially, there were people coming to us wanting to spend money, but at a greater look, they had so many holes in their bucket that spending money on the campaigns they wanted to get up and running was a complete waste. It was just going straight to water. The point is, guys, if you guys are looking at really growing your business, you've got to make sure you have solid foundations laid. We have, over the last 12 months, essentially revamped the whole way that we approach the digital space for trade businesses. And it all starts with laying the right foundations. So what does that look like for you? Well, does your website look right? Do you have the right conversion factors built onto the website? Are you capturing all of your leads and all of your contacts? Are those contacts being fed into a lead management system, which can help you, first of all, capture, but then automate and nurture your contacts? You do not want to be in that situation where you're constantly churning and burning leads. So guys, please, if you're doing any sort of outreach, any sort of marketing, make sure you have these things dialed in. Now, as I say, we've redesigned the whole way that we service our customers, and the first thing that we look at is foundations. So if that sounds like something that you want to at least get a different perspective on, head across to tradiewebguys.com.au, fill in the contact form and have the conversation. It's not going to cost you anything, but it could save you and make you thousands. I look forward to chatting with you. Enjoy the podcast. Did you know that 26% of all bankruptcies are coming from the construction industry? Did you also know that the contracts that you are given by your builder or principal contractor are expected to be negotiated? In this podcast, you're going to learn the following things: what you should be looking for in a contract, how to mitigate your exposure, and how to negotiate your contracts. Amongst many other things, this is a business skill that will serve you so well looking forward. I cannot encourage you enough to take this on board. Cian, welcome to the Sideshed podcast.
Hi, Matt. Nice to be here. Nice to chat.
Absolutely. Slight technical hitch there, but we're through it now.
Yes, back in business. Let's go.
Mate, thanks for joining us today. We are here to talk about the exciting topic of contracts, but specifically, we're talking about mastering the art of contract negotiation, which I think for a lot of the listeners and viewers out there, there's probably a bit of a and I know, because I used to be a plumbing contractor, I know there was a bit of a mental roadblock, I suppose, if you want to call it that, where you feel like you don't really have a position to negotiate a contract. And if you do that, then you'll end up, not winning the job and it'll be going off to be sent to someone else or whatever it might be. So I'm pretty keen today to dive into this topic. So I think there's a lot of listeners and viewers out there that would benefit from understanding, first of all, that contracts are there to be negotiated, and then some frameworks perhaps around how they might best want to tackle that.
Yep.
But before we dive in, give us a little bit of a spiel about how you got to where you are and what you do.
Okay, so my background is obviously is contracts. So going all the way back, my grandfather was a construction contractor in Galway in the west of Ireland, and actually when he died, there was a nice in the newspaper in Galway, the Galway Advertiser, I think it's called. They said the man who built Galway. So he built schools. I think he built churches, water towers, loads of kind of key things that are still there today. And actually, years later, where his building yard was, they built a hotel and a restaurant, and it was called Brennan's Yard. So come from a bit of contracting.
What a legacy.
Yeah, yeah.
Big
Well,
big boots to fill.
exactly, big boots to fill. But in that same story, he had a pretty simple philosophy of 33% people, 33% materials, 33% profit.
I love when
And that
Irish people say 33.
I could
Tough
have went
country.
33 in the third, right? If I really wanted to give you a chuckle. And when he was older, my uncle actually took over the business, and essentially it didn't go very well. Different philosophies, more risk taking, and
the old prophecy of inheriting a business without earning it. Was that the thing?
yes, what's the first generation earns it, the second generation spends it, or whatever it happens to be.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I think it was a different philosophy. To be honest, it was, my granddad had that very risk adverse. I'm not taking the job unless it fits this criteria of 33%, 33%, 33%. And I think my uncle wanted to take on leverage, take on debt, expand, go a different way, and just a different philosophy, and it obviously didn't work out. And the advice given to me was don't go into contracting. Don't go into that side of the business. It's hard work. You're always you're always fighting for the next job. Um, you know, loads that you should go client side. You should go get a degree, go client side, more stable income. And so I took that advice and I ran with it for the guts of essentially 20 years. And I worked, did a degree in construction economics and management, a master's in engineering. And then from there, it was essentially, I still love the adventure. So I was never like, office work was still pretty hard for me. So I ended up in Australia to start. Then I ended up in Saudi, Qatar, Iraq, working on site, working for large oil and gas companies from the client side. So when you see oil and gas contracts, in Australia, you got AS standards. A lot of companies will have seen. In the US, it's basically you got your American standards, and the oil and gas contracts will be the most hostile. They're written for every single one. So when you see them, they're pretty aggressive. And so what I kept seeing time and time again was subcontractors going out of business over and over and over, or losing money. And the reason was a lot of them, won just what you were talking about at the start, Matt. They didn't negotiate their contracts, didn't know how to negotiate their contracts, and they didn't comply with their contracts at all, what the contract said. And so in these large organizations, and this has filtered down to even smaller GCs, right? So the smallest GC at this stage with technology and all of that sort of stuff has corporate governance instilled in their business. And so if you submit a change order or a variation or EOT, or whatever it's called in your contract, and you haven't complied with the contract from a notification point of view, or submitted your document or your EOT within the time it says, the guy on the other side, and that the guy who was me, will have a document that he has to take to a contracts committee or his boss internally to say, hey, XYZ plumbing contractor has submitted this extension of time, and there'll be a box that you need to tick that says, did they comply with the contract? And so if they didn't comply with the contract, it's a no. You can't do it.
I distinctly remember. I mean, it almost feels like a line in the sand, to be honest, but I'm sure it wasn't. The time when I was running a plumbing business. Well, I mean, essentially I was kind of, I suppose, contracting to a plumbing company that had a big contract for tier 2 and 3 builders. And I remember the day, like we went from one job to the next, and all of a sudden the builders just became lawyers. There was no, they weren't builders anymore. They were lawyers, and we'd be in there as plumbers. And we knew these people, had done work with them in the past, but all of a sudden it was like this next job. It was a completely different thing, and it was contract this and contract that and blah 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 blah. And I was like, what the heck has happened to this like industry? Like we used to be able to just do stuff and we could get some things done, and all of a sudden it became this big legal battle. And in the end, that was the truthfully that was the project that made me leave the industry. I got out of it. I was like, this is ended up losing like 50 grand or something, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is when you're a little when you're young and but anyway, it was really I felt like from that point there was I just didn't want to be part of it,
So something did change. Well, what year was that, Matt?
It must have been, I reckon, 2008 or 9 or something around there, somewhere around there.
So something certainly did change in that. So your listeners, I guess, know your GCs and your main contractors are a finance company. They don't do any construction, right? They don't. And the way they make money is they win a job and they get a loan. The loan pays for the subcontractors. They sub out all the work and they make money between the difference between the two, getting paid by the principal. And so at some stage, a bunch of PwC people, Deloitte people came in and said, from a risk strategy, you need to push all of the risk down onto the subcontractor.
Yeah.
And there was a number of court cases globally where time bars were upheld in construction, meaning that if you didn't submit a notice on time, that you would take that delay on your own shoulders as a subcontractor. And a lot of there's a flurry of them around the world, and the court basically said, no, you didn't submit it. It clearly says in the contract that you have to submit your notice, therefore you're not getting paid. And so it's a way to save money and reduce risk, and so they're all doing it.
And it kind of felt like at that point it was a game of, well, too bad if you go under. Like that was the sort of sentiment, It was like, well, if you go bankrupt, we don't care. We'll just pick the next plumber off the list and move on to them, kind of thing. And I know a lot of the smaller business builders out there, like that's not the case. There's a lot more of a loyalty sort of approach to things. But I feel like on these bigger tier, like it's literally just everyone just overnight turned into lawyers and no one was building anymore. And all they wanted to do was, it just felt like they just wanted to screw the next guy down.
For sure. Well, that is, I mean, we'll talk, I'll go into it in a little bit. But that is definitely what the way you described it is a belief that a lot of subcontractors have. And if you actually just look at general relationships, like a relationship that I'll have with you, if I do whatever you ask me to do, anything, I just go ahead and do it. I don't sign whatever. Like, let's not even talk about the contract. If I do whatever you want me to do you respect me? Do you think I'm easy? Do you think I'm easy to work with? Do you respect me? Like, what's that relationship? If I literally do whatever you say, roll over every single time.
Well, yeah, it'd be a bit weird. It's sort of like you without any resistance or any opinion. It's like talking to a robot.
Yeah, and so in contracts, and this is absolute truth from working on the other side. It is 100% a game, and actually, if you don't play the game, they lose confidence in you. And so I give you like two different. So if the secret, I guess, in all of this, and obviously they don't go around, and it's no one's fault because they don't advertise this, but they give you their worst possible contract to sign. They couldn't be any worse, but they know it's a game, and they have backup clauses for every single one, and they have permission to negotiate to X level on all of these things. So you just need to know what to negotiate, what's important to you. And so they're expecting you to negotiate. And if you don't negotiate, they think you haven't a clue what you're doing. Right? Well, you do negotiate. You negotiate hard to actually respect you. And in the post-award phase, there's this also the approach where people are like, oh, I don't want to be contractual. If I'm contractual, they're gonna piss them off and they're not going to give me more work. Right? So a lot of people think that as well. But again, that's not the reality. That is true if you start off super compliant, doing everything they ask you to do, and then halfway through the project, you start getting contractual because you're like, oh, there's a problem here now. I need to get contractual. That will annoy anybody. If you start off contractual, like a Downer or a company like that, they just look at you. Oh, these guys are switched on. They know what they're doing. They're really quick with their paperwork, and that's the perception they get. You get that respect, professionalism, rather than rolling over, being told what to do whatever I tell you to do. And a lot of times when you're being told to do whatever you're told this stuff, it's by their project manager, and he's oftentimes covering his own ass.
Sure.
Internally, and so he could be telling you to do all the stuff that he really shouldn't be telling you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, don't submit loads of little variations. Roll them all up into one change order or one variation and submit it. So that happens all the time. That's him trying to save his own ass. So it doesn't look like there's all these changes that he's making, but in reality, you have not complied with the contract. You've not followed the proper procedure in the contract, and so you're completely at his mercy if he decides he doesn't want to do it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's a confusing and I suppose a stressful position when we're brought up going through the education system to become a trade business owner. We're not lawyers. We're not, all of a sudden you've got this legal document forced upon you, which essentially can ruin you, and in a lot of cases does.
Can I challenge you, Matt, on that one?
Sure.
So you were a plumber, and a lot of your listeners are, right? So if I gave you a drawing by an architect or an engineer, right? Detailed drawing. Most people can't read those. Can you read them?
Well, I mean, yeah, but we're kind of taught to read those things, right?
Yeah. So you can interpret a drawing or a document produced by an architect and an engineer, right? The only other document in construction is this terms and conditions. So it's drafted by a lawyer. And so similarly, most people need to learn somewhere along the line how to interpret the contract. It's just the other part of it.
I'm not denying you don't need to learn it. I'm just saying, a lot of people find themselves in situations where they they take on a project and then all of a sudden there's a contract there and they don't know it. So they've got to go and learn it, at which point it's kind of too late, which is of course where people like yourselves come into play. I appreciate that. But what I'm trying to say, I mean, it's like the reason we have this podcast, right? Because people want to learn things they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So this is one of those necessities, I suppose, like it or not, where within business, these are things you need to learn in order to get by, or you can come unstuck.
Yeah, I mean, there's terms. I mean, liquidated damages and consequential damages. They're things you need to know, right? So most people know what liquidated damages are. They don't know what consequential damages are. Consequential damages is the dangerous one.
What's consequential? I know consequential. I know liquidated. So just for the listeners out there, liquidated is essentially if you don't finish the project by a certain time, then you could be subject to charges, and normally at an astronomical day rate, right?
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. So I'll give you an example of both of them at play. Okay, so imagine you've been engaged to build a hotel, okay, or do the plumbing for a hotel. Let's say do the plumbing for a hotel, and you're late. It's definitely your fault, right? You couldn't get materials on time, or whatever. You couldn't get the people, whatever it is. It's your fault. There's no argument there, and you're happy that it's your fault. Liquidated damages is to compensate the client for you being late in the construction of the work. So because you're late, you've delayed another subcontractor who comes in after you. He needs to be paid like extra money. It's to compensate the client on the delay in the construction itself, because it's going to cost more money because you're late. And so that's what you're going to have to pay. And more often than not, you don't actually pay any money. They just offset it against your final account. Consequential damages is reimbursing the client for their loss of profit for not being able to rent out the hotel rooms.
Right.
And the problem here is, depending on how big your client is, their loss of profit could be the size of your company.
Sure.
So that's why, just as a ballpark, you never agree to consequential damages.
So, and if I'm jumping the gun here, let me know. But are these things that you can negotiate out of a contract, like LDs?
Yes.
And right, okay.
So LDs, for example, you can't depending on the business, right? So some business doesn't make sense to have LDs, right? So, businesses, maybe scaffolding sort of businesses, don't really make sense. Like you impacting the project with not having scaffolding on time is not the biggest deal in the world. You can take down your scaffolding straight away. You could argue that you shouldn't have to pay liquidated damages, and you could be okay. But it's not that. With liquidated damages, you don't want to argue that you don't have them. You just want to make sure that the amount that you pay is reasonable, makes sense, and it's not stupidly high, and that there's a cap, right? So you want to cap it at 10% of the contract value. It can't go on indefinitely. You go, okay, I'll pay X amount until I reach 10% of the contract value. Then that's it. Then it's done. Okay, so that's what you want to agree to.
Which is pretty much your retention gone if that happens, right?
Pretty much your retention, and it's almost like it's almost as if they planned that, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. So the retention as well is obviously a big one. When you get your retention back is important. You want to get your retention back obviously as soon as possible. So you can argue get it all back on PC, or you can argue that you get 50% back on PC, 50% back at the end of the defects liability period. The length of your defects liability period is the problem. So people often get themselves into a hole where they're like, I've got 12 months defects liability. I've got to come out to fix something on site during that 12 months, and they tag on another 12 months. I'm not going to get back for another 12 months. So that's a pain. So again, that's what you want to make sure that doesn't happen, or at least that you're clear if that does happen, that you're aware that will happen.
I know so many friends and colleagues that like they just write retention off. They're like, it's almost impossible to get.
Yeah, it's like when you're renting a house, your bond, right? You know they're going to try and rip you off, right? But no, retention, you should get your retention back. If you've done everything right, you should get your retention back. There's no reason not to.
So anyway, I suppose moving along, it'd be good to sort of, I suppose, help the listeners and viewers out there with, I suppose, some of the frameworks or some of the things we could practically apply, to negotiate these contracts properly. I mean, you've given some good little insights there. Can we expand on some of these things?
Yeah, sure. I think the most important one for a lot of people these days, at the moment, with the market, and remember we talked at the start about main contractors, general contractors being finance companies. It's risky business. And if you actually just Google right now, if you look in the newspaper now, builders are going out of business. There's a lot of builders going out of business. And the reason for that, obviously, is they're not able to deliver the project on time. They're probably getting hit with the damages themselves. Cost of materials are going up. But probably the main one is because they have such big leverage, such big loans, and the interest rates are going up, and it's just not working out for them. But when they go out of business or they're losing money, right? So let's just say they're losing money. They're trying to save money, and they save money by not paying the subcontractors. Or if they've gone out of business, again, who does it affect? It affects the subcontractors because they're not going to get paid. And so one of the most important clauses at the moment is the termination clause. And so the problem that we see with a termination clause is they will list all of the ways that they can terminate you. They can terminate you for convenience, which is basically just for their it is what it is, for their own reason, right? So convenience really means, an example would be, we've stopped a project now, and so we're terminating this contract for our convenience. Or sometimes as plumbers maybe, or scaffolding, they could get, it's not like, a civil company might have some rebar concrete in the ground. So it's actually hard to get rid of them off-site because, all of their stuff is like in the ground. Whereas plumbers and services and scaffolding companies, it's easy enough to get you off-site and get someone in to replace you if they wanted to. So they want to have this clause called termination for convenience to get someone, get you out and get someone else in. Then there's termination for default, and that's you not doing the job that you said you were supposed to do, just not delivering. Right? And
that sounds justified.
That's justified.
Sure.
What's not justified or not fair is there won't be any ways for you to terminate the contract.
Right.
So you read there, it just says all the ways that they can terminate the contract, but no way you can terminate the contract. So what you want to ask for is what's called reciprocal termination. And that means, and it's fair. You can negotiate this. It's very hard for them to turn back and say, if you go to them, hey, look, I noticed you got a termination clause. We'd like to have reciprocal termination, meaning if you default on the contract, that we can terminate you as well. That's fair, right? And more often than not, they'll agree to that because it is fair. Yeah, 100%. Honestly, just as a statistic, so we've done over 2,600 contract reviews, and 82% of what we put forward gets across the line.
Yeah,
It's a game.
And what are the main things that you do? Go back to them with, like, what are the things that you're looking to, or like, as part of that 80%, what are the things that you are asking to be updated typically? I mean, I guess there's not like a one glove fits all, but
yeah. Okay, well, let me just finish the termination thing just quickly, and I'll come back around. So with the termination, what you want to make sure is that you can terminate them for default. Because the problem that we see is, let's just say you're on site, you're hearing that the contractor's going bust, they're losing money, and then they haven't paid you in month one, right? So that obviously impacts your cash flow. You still have to continue working. So you're thinking to yourself, I'm still spending money on guys, on equipment, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get paid in month two. And you have to stay on the job because you can't terminate because there's no clause for termination. Okay, you have to go outside of the contract, involve lawyers and all of that sort of stuff to do what you want to do. Whereas if there's a clause in the contract that says, hey, I haven't been paid, you're like, these guys seem like they're being going insolvent. I'm going to terminate the contract now and cut my losses. That's what you want to be able to do. So that's one thing.
Is it a case, if you terminate a contract, are you cutting your losses? Like, are you ever going to get paid?
Yeah, you should get paid. No, you could come back to them and get paid for you not getting paid in that particular thing. You can take them to in what state are you in? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Security Payments Act. And that's reasonably cheap to do as well. Okay, so that would be a lot of advice that when we're talking to our clients and they're like, we're really not sure about this. You there's kind of two sides of the coin. One is spend as little money as possible while still doing the work that they're asking you to do. And then we can obviously have a parallel strategy where we'll run Security of Payments Act if they don't pay you on time. So there's various different ways to skin a cat, but as long as you have that termination clause in the contract where you can terminate if they don't pay you, that's very important.
Just on a slight segue, is this something that you would implement knowing full well that you're burning the bridge with that company? Like, are you ever going to get a job from them again if you implement that?
If you actually pull the trigger on that?
Yeah.
I mean, at that stage, you're thinking, but you're screwed anyway. But there's so many, honestly, in the last 6 months, Matt, so many guys I'm having a chat with are saying, yeah, I don't care. I'm actually fine for them to keep my retention. I just want to get out. Right, because people have won contracts in COVID or after COVID at certain rates, and then now those rates are completely unprofitable, and they're being held to it.
Sure, which is another conversation entirely, isn't it? I mean, I'm guessing. Well, I'd like to. I know for certain. There's a lot of, different types of contracts that are going out there to protect builders and the like in the space of this new environment in which we see ourselves in relation to materials and things like that. I don't know if we're going to touch on that in this. Probably not, because we're talking about how to negotiate a contract. But it's probably worth, if you guys haven't updated your contracts, do it.
Yeah, no, it's all relevant, and this is when you're talking about, okay, so what do we negotiate in our contracts? So, I mean, really, this can be a one-time thing for each construction company, because as a plumbing company, let's just spitball here. When you were a plumber, what's a risk in plumbing? Like, for civil companies, it's dewatering, like water, rain delays. For plumbing, there's obviously some sort of risk that is more risky to you guys than anything else. What would that be?
I mean, not being able to get hold of materials that you can put in, being held up by the trades.
Yep. So they would be the material. Okay, so being held up by the trades is a typical one that would be sorted in the contract. But the materials could be a big one. Okay, so you can't get your plumbing materials, or your materials are increasing dramatically in cost. So structuring your contract to make sure that you get paid up front to secure materials could be a way to approach it, or to make sure that there's often a clause in the contract about when you get paid for materials. And so a lot of times you can get paid for materials only when it's installed. So imagine you spent all of this money buying materials. Okay, maybe even you had to take out a loan to buy these materials. Let's say they're expensive materials. Okay, so I don't know what that is for plumbing, but I don't know, like maybe just a big copper. Yeah, let's just say copper. You spent a load of money you spent on copper. You got a loan to get it, right? And so you go on site and they're late. You can't install the copper, and the client says, "We're not paying you for it because the contract says you have to install it." So now you're sitting on this copper, and then you're also eating the interest on the loan, and you're losing money. So that's a way where it can go badly as well. So you want to get paid for it on delivery, and paid another percentage when it's installed. Or sometimes they might say, "Okay, we'll pay you for it, but you have to give us some sort of security that you don't just run off."
Right. I know we had. I don't know if this is still common play, by the way. I've been out of the game for a long time, but there was this whole design and construct contract thing that that went in that came around sort of back then, and essentially the premise there was, well, it's up to you to do the work. It's up to you to cover all of the like, we're not going to pay for any variations because you should have covered that within the design, like your design and construction of this project, blah blah blah. Essentially, it felt like it was just a game of passing the buck back onto the individual. Does that still exist?
Well, so what exists that is not good, right, is that they will do the design, and then they will give it to you, and then there'll be a clause that says, document discrepancies and errors are on you, because you, right? So even though we've made a mistake in the design, you're the expert plumber, and therefore you should have spotted the issues and let us know about it. So you didn't spot the issue, and therefore you got to eat the cost. So that is in most contracts, which is pretty nasty. But from a design and construct, I think it's reasonably fair if someone says, "Hey, I want you to design everything and build it."
Yeah,
I think it's pretty fair for them to be like, "Well, you designed it wrong." I would take that approach.
sure. One thing that I suppose the listeners out there probably can relate to is that situation where, and you said it's covered in a lot of contracts, but we found that often it wasn't, where you might have, you are held up by other trades. And sure, you've got your Gantt charts and things of being, people are meant to be doing things by a certain time, but some it doesn't cover everything all the time. There's always something that pops up which can put you in a position down the track where you might be subject to LDs. So I'm wondering how you tackle those. I mean, the obvious things are, well, we can't do the fit out because the gyprock isn't done. Like, that sort of stuff is pretty obvious. But then there's things that happen earlier which can sometimes, drag these things out, which can put you in certain, I suppose, positions of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of, say, your average construction company, how they'll approach they will have the opinion that if I'm contractual, I'm going to piss off the project manager. Is probably the main one. They don't want to be contractual, even though the contract says you have to do certain things. So you're basically not doing what the contract says to not piss off the project manager. And so we've got this phrase that we use in our business called squeaky bum time. And let me explain what it is. So there used to be a very famous football manager in the UK called Alex Ferguson, Man United manager for 30 years. And he had the phrase, he coined the phrase squeaky bum time. And what he was talking about was in the last quarter of a football game, people start shifting around in the plastic seats in the stadium, right? And made a little squeak, and he called it squeaky bum time. And that's what's important. And so in construction, the last quarter is where it all kicks off. Everything kicks off in the last quarter. And so the way to look at it is, all you're doing contractually is preparing yourself for when the main contractor or your client is trying to save money, because he's losing money. He's trying to reduce his costs. He's going around, he's looking for ways to save money. And so if he looks at you and he goes, "Oh, those guys got all their paperwork in place, I'm not going to it's just going to be too hard to battle with these guys. I'm going to go somewhere else. That's what happens. And so on the bigger projects, with John Holland or CPB or in Australia, in the US with Turner, they will bring in closeout teams in the final quarter of a project for this specific reason. So say you have a relationship with a project manager, Matt, and then this closeout team comes in. They go to you, hey Matt, I know you had a relationship with a PM. Look, we can't rely on that. We just have to rely on the contract because I'm coming in here now. You haven't complied with the contract, and therefore, you're not getting paid. So all we're doing is setting ourselves up for that final quarter. That's it. That's the big picture. So as we go through the project, we just want to build a body of evidence. And by building a body of evidence, it's just submitting notices according to the contract. Now, you can submit a notice that you're delayed, right? So every contract will say you have to submit a notice for delay and submit a notice if you think there's been a change to scope. Okay, and then you have to follow up with a variation and follow up with an EOT. You can submit notices for delay, and you can say there's no impact to the schedule. There's no cost impact to you. In fact, we managed to mitigate it. We put guys elsewhere to do different things, even though there was a delay. And you submit that, and so they read that and they go, "Oh, okay, that's okay. That's pretty cool." But you're building this body of evidence over time. So then, when you do submit a proper delay, you do submit a proper variation. They're kind of okay to receive it because they've been receiving them all along. But then in the final quarter, when things kick off, you got all of this paperwork and you go, hey guys, look at all of these notices, delays we submitted. Look at all of these variations we submitted. Obviously we are massively disrupted over the course of the project, and therefore being hit with liquidated damages is completely unfair. And by the way, you'll never get hit with liquidated damages. What they will do, and then they go, hey, Matt, you're 10 days late, so liquidated damages 50 or whatever, 20 grand, 50 grand, whatever it happens to be, 100 grand. We're going to offset that against your final payment claim, and then you have to argue it, and then you come up with that's what they'll do. You will argue it. They'll pay you maybe half of it, maybe less of it. That's the game they'll play.
But I mean, is that not the case where, I mean, you've done, I mean, sure, you've documented these things. There's variations that need to be done, and you've submitted it. It's a delay notice. You mitigated it by, like you said, managing it in one way or another. At the end of the day, when it comes to the final quarter, doesn't all that become null and void anyway? Like if you say to them, well, we did all this for you, couldn't they just say, yeah, that's great, but what about the contract?
So, well, you've complied with the contract, or you haven't complied with the contract? What's happened?
Well, I'm saying like that example that you gave before, where you've built, you've done all this work for them, and you might not have actually submitted for any like payment increase or whatever it might be, but you've done the work because you're trying to do the right thing. But then come the final quarter, like it's not like they necessarily have to do the same thing back to you, right? It's because you did all this, we get they'll just go, well, here's a contract. You shouldn't have done all that stuff.
Exactly. That's what they will do. Right. So you're trying to build good faith by doing all this stuff, being this subcontractor that rolls over, does whatever he's told all of the time. They don't respect that. They respect the guy that goes, yeah, do it for you. Here's my variation immediately. Here's my notice of a variation, and here's my variation. Or here's my EOT and my EOT costs. Done straight away. I'll get going as soon as that's signed. I'm done. Now, some contracts will say you have to go ahead and do the work right before you get an approved variation, but there's strategies to deal with that as well. That's
I mean, doesn't that kind of defy the point?
Well, the contract will say, time is of the essence. So we want you to go ahead and do it. And, in good faith, we'll organize a payment concurrently.
Right. And so that's the kind of thing you would look for in a contract and say, well, that's not worth a pinch of shit. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. 100%.
Let's talk about the actual negotiation process of the contract. Like what's the framework? How do we receive this contract and then go through it and build a case to negotiate on?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Let's just talk about the how first, right? So the practical how is you want to have a document that you submit to them. Okay. You're not looking to put in 25, 30 things at all. Okay, you're looking to put in the least amount you can put in that have the highest impact to your risk. That's the way you want to approach it, right? So it's not a volume game. The way you want to write it is you want to explain each thing, right? So just let me give you an understanding on their side. So a lot of people worried, oh, I don't want to do it because they're going to go with someone else. They're not, right? The way it works in their side of the company, they have a contracts administrator whose job is to award X amount of contracts a year. And so this comes into him. He gives the technical part of the bid to the technical people. He might do the commercial part himself, but he'll give the terms and conditions to their in-house people to look at it. He won't even look at it himself. And then the best way to do it is if you could. He just wants to get everything done as quick as possible. Okay, so if you do this big, long, drawn-out thing, it's going to annoy him because he just wants to get it done. If you make it really easy for him, he might even just do it himself and just approve them very quickly, okay, because he wants to get going. So bear that in mind. That is important. But the way you want to approach it is not hostile at all. This is kind of a little bit of our secret sauce. You really want to play the lowly subcontractor. I'm just a subcontractor, and here's me explaining why this clause shouldn't be in my contract. A couple of things to lean on is a lot, and this is the honest truth. A lot of construction companies gave their contract to their insurance company and say, if something goes wrong here, are you going to pay out? A lot of insurance companies would say, no, not based on that contract, because it voids X, Y, and Z part of our whatever. And so they won't. They don't do that because But if you did that, that would happen. So you can say, hey, look, our insurance requirements say we can't agree to this. We have a set of commercial principles. So this is that one-time thing. So if you build a set of commercial principles for your company, you can go, here are the things that I agree to, here are the things I don't agree to. Okay. And you can go, hey, this is strays from our commercial principle. We can't agree to this. So consequential damages, we have a commercial principle that we don't agree to consequential damages. So we can't agree to this. So you got two things where they're like, oh, right, okay, well, they have this commercial principles. Also, their insurance companies won't pay out. So, okay, we have to move on these particular things. So that's kind of ways to leverage this. Then obviously there's the what. So what are you going to ask for? So there's big ticket items that you want to be looking for. So obviously no-brainers are you want to limit your overall liability to the contract value at a minimum, maybe 50% of the contract value. You want to make sure the termination clause is in there. You want to make sure your LDs are reasonable. Payment terms are very important in that a lot of times they'll say 20 business days, 30 calendar days, which is, that's an industry standard for whatever. If larger companies, that would be an industry standard, smaller for smaller companies. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is how long until the money's actually in your bloody bank account, right? Because let me give you a bad example. Let's just say it says 30 days end of month. And so it also says you need to submit a payment application on the 26th of month one. So you submit your payment application 26th of month one. They don't approve it. They don't give you a payment certificate to invoice against until the 1st of the month or the 2nd of the month. And then you invoice against it. End of month, then 30 days. It's actually 60 days. Yeah. Right? So there are the little things you go like, no. We do 30 days full stop. Right, it's just 30 days. It's not like none of this, whatever. It's 30 days from when we submit our payment application. So you need to figure out, there's obviously, I can't go through absolutely every single thing, but you need to figure out that one-time thing to understand what your risk is and then make sure that you hit that on everything, right? And a really smart way to go about doing it, I'm probably giving away a little bit too much here, is that as part of your proposals that you submit, you can submit a copy of your commercial principles and say, our bid is based on the acceptance of these commercial principles. Because submitting your contract to a client oftentimes is useless because they just come over the top with their own contract and you have to sign it. So submitting your contract is just useless, right? So you just go, you're basically saying, I know I'm going to sign your contract. I'm just saying that these are our commercial principles that we don't stray from. And you won't get all of those things, but it gives you leverage to say, hey, we said our price was based on the acceptance of these commercial principles, and then that's it. And so just can I talk about the why for a second? The why this is important is that, and I think the biggest and most successful construction companies really fight hard on the terms and conditions, and it's for this reason. And sorry, another thing to that we found from dealing with so many construction companies is the most successful construction companies have kind of almost two things in common. One is they're a family-owned business that have gotten huge, right? Which is I always found that interesting. And the other one is they've been in business a long time, and I think they're correlated. And they're correlated in that they don't look for they won't take high risk jobs. Remember I was talking about my granddad back at the start. They are really selective of the jobs that they take, and they take a 5 or 10 year view on construction. And so the family-owned businesses, I guess, they're passing it down to their kids, and they're thinking, I don't want to take on this risk. And so when you have that view, you approach contracts differently, and like you can see what happens in construction companies all the time. So if you're it's all about the downside. Okay, so when something bad goes wrong, so if you're in construction long enough, something's going to go wrong. Like what you talked about with your 50 grand, something's going to go wrong along the lines. And so if you never negotiate your contract or you never do anything, okay, when that bad thing goes wrong, it's going to go bang. It's going to be a real downside, right? So let's just say a bad recession hits, or you have a huge dispute, and it's going to go bang because the contract that you signed and the projects that you're taking on are risky. Whereas if you're pretty selective and you also negotiate every single contract, every time when that thing does go wrong, it's going to be a little blip, and then you'll continue on into the future. And so really, success in construction is about longevity. Can you last the duration of time? So many construction companies go from bid to bid to bid to bid to boom. They're just bidding a bid and a bid, and they win projects, and then one will go badly, and then that's the end of the business. So that's what I'm imploring your listeners not to do.
Sure. In lieu of the fact that most of the listeners and viewers out there, let's just presume anyway, don't have the full knowledge or capacity to understand some of these contracts and the legalities that are tied into the clauses and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What is the best place for them to go to start getting educated about these, so that in an ideal world, they're mitigating their level of risk and they're avoiding some of the problems that could essentially they'll essentially come across, through just ignorance at the end of the day?
Yep. So on I've got a podcast called Construction Secrets.
Yep.
Just you can search my name, or you can search Construction Secrets on YouTube or Spotify or iTunes or whatever. And essentially, if you just listen to that, if you listen to all of the episodes from start to finish, that's it. You're done. Right? Honestly, right? It's all in there, and you'll understand everything. Over time, and you essentially you become contractually savvy.
Sure. I mean, I've seen contracts, that come through like this big. Sorry for the viewers out there. I'm trying to, I suppose, indicate 150 A4 pages plus. That's a lot of reading, a lot of comprehension on something that you're probably not that geared up for. Is that where you'd essentially recommend engaging someone, potentially like yourselves, that can go through and read those content, understands them, has that sort of background?
Yeah, 100%. So here's the problem. There's two main problems. One is if you're bidding for work, in the bidding documents, in the tender documents, they will say, at the time of tender, you need to present all of these things, right? So that is cost prohibitive to do that and time. If you're like bidding 4 or 5 jobs every month, or whatever it is, how do you do that for every single one? Do you read all of those contracts every single time? Right. That's very difficult. And the second issue that you can run into is, it can be, if you go to lawyers, it can be very expensive, and the lawyers don't often understand construction. They'll do the 30, 35 departures in that document, and some of them don't make a difference to your business. So the key is finding a company, and of course, we Quantum Contract Solutions is our company. We can help you. Is finding people that understand construction, because stuff is different, right? Scaffolding companies don't need to worry about defects liability periods because they take down their scaffolding straight away and it's done. Various different other trades like steel fabricators really need to be on top of when they get paid for their steel when it's delivered, because they could spend millions on steel columns or whatever it is. So different things matter, and it's about understanding your own risk. And even you could use our service, and I'm genuinely just looking out for your listeners. You still need to be able to interpret contracts, to be able to talk to your opposing person. It's quite threatening to the opposing PM, or powerful, I'd say, is a better word, when you're able to confidently talk about the contract, right? And you're able to say, hey, that makes absolutely no sense. Why are you asking me to X, Y, and Z? And that's what you really, if you can do that, it'll make a huge difference.
So does someone like yourselves and Quantum Contract Solutions, like, do you guys negotiate on behalf of the business owner, or do you just give it back to them and say, here's what we've come up with, now you go negotiate?
We can do both, right? So a lot of times it's like 2 over and backs. It's like done via email anyway. So we give you the first batch, and then they'll come back, and then we'll go over again. If there's ever a meeting where they just want to finalize everything, we'll jump on that meeting on your behalf and then negotiate for you. Okay. So a key term that I like to use for your and I really do believe it, is the returns are in the terms.
Yeah.
Right. So big construction companies do this for a reason, right? And in the hierarchy of contracts, the most hostile, difficult contract is given to the subcontractor. And so, it makes a big difference, ultimately to your bottom line over time.
And so do you not think, though, when you're in a situation where, big companies put tenders out for people to, businesses to subcontract onto, in that situation where somebody comes, but I mean, in truth, it's probably a good thing if it happens because you're dodging a bullet. But in that instance where you do come back with, oh, I just want you to liaise with Cian here, he's going to negotiate do our contract negotiation, they'd just be like, oh, don't bother, we're just going to go speak to the next person who won't do that.
No, they won't. They don't do that. That's the reality of it. That's not how it works. With the corporate governance, and that all of these companies now have, there is, you will go, we're bidding to these 5 people, and of these 5 people, blah blah blah, this is why we're going to these 5 people. Again, it comes into that contracts person on their side, he distributes it. You can be technically qualified first before the price. All of that stuff is supposed to be run. Now, if you're dealing with dodgy builders, maybe they might say something. And sometimes, if you're a small company, they might say something like that. But the reality is, that's just this is how business is done in construction at the moment. And so by not doing it, you're putting yourself at a massive disadvantage.
Yeah, sure.
Or massive risk.
And like we just said, you're probably dodging a bullet if they do come back with something to that retort.
Yeah, if they're saying that, they're going to treat you like,
sure,
they're going to treat like shit. If they're saying something like that, so is that someone you want to have a relationship over time? Are they going to respect you if you roll over? Are they going to respect it? They're definitely going to respect you a lot more if you go, no, sorry, we don't agree to these things. Sure, we can move on X, Y, and Z, but we're standing firm on this because of our insurance and our commercial principles. And then, honestly, 90% of the time, they will roll over.
Well, mate, this has been awesome. I'm sure this is a topic we could probably talk about for days, in truth. But I think for the listeners out there, I hope that gave you a bit of insight and a bit of leverage as to how you can handle that negotiation aspect of contracts. And I think the bottom line for me is just don't be afraid to do it. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, and don't be afraid to ask, to come back to them with, what you consider to be reasonable. Cian, the website is Quantum, Quantum, contractsolutions.com. Do you guys only serve Australian clients, or?
No, we're in the US and Canada as well. Australia, New Zealand, US, Canada.
Okay, perfect. That's great. And your podcast name again, was it the Construction Secrets Podcast? Is that right?
Just Construction Secrets. You search Construction Secrets and you'll find it straight away.
Beautiful. That's great. And that's on everywhere you'd listen to podcasts, I imagine.
Yeah, you can just jump in. I think there's 105 episodes in there. Get them all in your head and you're good to go.
Beautiful. That's awesome. Mate, thank you so much for the time. If you listeners or viewers out there, if you've got any questions or any feedback, or if you want anything followed up on specifically when you see this podcast come out, wherever you see it come out, whether it's in the newsletter or on the Facebook group or whatever it might be, just let us know what those questions are. Leave it in the comments. If you'd like me to get Cian back on the show to answer any of those questions, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to. Cian, anything you'd like to close with?
No, that's it. Just remember to your guys that the returns are in the terms. The fortune is in the fine print, as we like to say to our clients. So if you get that stuff sorted and you're able to interpret this other document, that you can interpret other documents as well, so well, like drawings and stuff, it'll make a huge difference to your business.
Sure. And if you guys do like that topic and the topic around contracts, you can also go check out episode 245, 46, and 47. We did a little series on how to protect your trade business from legal risk. So go check that out. Otherwise, Cian, thanks so much for your time, mate. That has been awesome. And I look forward to chatting to you in the future.
Thanks for having me on.
That's a wrap. Big shout out to Cian from Quantum Contract Solutions for coming on the show and instilling his knowledge with us on this amazing episode. To get notified of upcoming videos, hit that subscribe button and turn your notifications on. And please be sure to share this video with someone who would get some value out of it.